A tariff is essentially a tax placed on goods that are brought into a country from abroad. It's one of the oldest tools governments use to regulate trade, and it can have a direct impact on the prices you see at the store. When you hear about tariffs in the news, it might sound like a distant policy debate, but the effects can hit much closer to home than you might expect. For example, when the US government imposes a tariff, let's say on a German luxury car or a Chinese-made smartphone, the company importing those goods is the one that pays the tax at the border. But in reality, that extra cost doesn't just disappear. Most of the time, importers pass those costs along to American consumers, which means you end up paying more for the same products. Whether you're shopping for a new car, the latest phone, or even everyday household items, tariffs can quietly drive up the price tags. Everyday essentials, from groceries to electronics, can become noticeably more expensive for families across the country. Even if you don't buy imported goods directly, many products on store shelves rely on parts or materials from overseas, so the ripple effect of tariffs can touch almost every corner of your budget. On the other hand, tariffs are often used as a way to protect American industries from cheaper foreign competition. By making imported goods more expensive, the government hopes to encourage people to buy products made in the US, which can help support domestic jobs and keep certain industries alive. This is especially important in sectors like steel, automobiles, and technology, where global competition is fierce. Beyond economics, tariffs can also be a powerful tool in foreign policy. Sometimes they're used as leverage in negotiations, pressuring other countries to change their trade practices or address issues like intellectual property theft and unfair subsidies. In these cases, tariffs become part of a larger diplomatic strategy, not just an economic one. But the impact of tariffs doesn't stop at higher prices in the store. They can also create uncertainty for businesses and consumers alike, making it harder to predict what things will cost in the future. Tariffs disrupt global supply chains, forcing companies to make tough choices. Some may absorb the extra costs, others might raise prices, and many are left scrambling to find new suppliers or change how they do business. Each of these options brings its own set of risks and uncertainties, which can ripple through the entire economy. For businesses, this unpredictability makes it much harder to plan for the future, invest in new projects, or hire more workers. The uncertainty can slow down economic growth and even lead to job losses in some sectors. Ultimately, tariffs force the country to make a fundamental choice. Should the US embrace open markets and free trade, which can lower prices and increase variety for consumers? Or should it use tariffs to protect domestic industries and pursue broader policy goals, even if that means higher costs for everyone? The current legal battle over President Trump's tariffs puts this debate front and center. The outcome won't just affect prices at the checkout. It could reshape the US economy and redefine the balance of power between Congress and the president for years to come. The Supreme Court has stepped into the national spotlight by agreeing to hear a landmark case that could have far-reaching consequences for the balance of power in the United States government. At the heart of the case is a critical question. Did President Trump have the legal authority to impose sweeping tariffs on foreign goods, affecting billions of dollars in trade, and impacting countless American businesses and consumers? Recognizing the urgency and national significance, the justices have fast-tracked the case, placing it on their docket for oral arguments in November 2025. This rare move signals just how important the outcome will be for the country's economic and political future. For the first time, the Supreme Court will directly address the scope of a president's power under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, to unilaterally set tariffs. The decision could set a precedent for how future presidents use emergency powers in economic matters. The IEPA, enacted in 1977, was designed to give the president flexibility to respond to international crises by regulating commerce during emergencies. But the law's language is broad, and it's never been clear whether it allows for sweeping, open-ended taxes on imports that bypass Congress. The stakes are high. The Constitution originally gave Congress the exclusive power to regulate trade and impose taxes. If the court sides with the president, it could shift that balance, giving the executive branch unprecedented control over economic policy and international trade. Meanwhile, businesses and state governments have been left in limbo, facing uncertainty and financial strain since the tariffs were enacted. Lower courts have already ruled that the tariffs overstepped presidential authority. but the final word now rests with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's upcoming decision will not only clarify the limits of presidential power, but also shape the future of American trade policy for years to come, affecting businesses, consumers, and the very structure of government itself. The legal fight began when a coalition of businesses in 12 states challenged Trump's tariffs, arguing they hurt local economies and overstepped presidential authority. These tariffs, they claimed, were not just a minor inconvenience but a significant threat to the economic stability of various sectors. The coalition believed that the president had exceeded his powers, infringing upon the rights and responsibilities traditionally held by Congress. Their lawsuits were combined and brought before the U.S. Court of International Trade, where they argued that IEPA wasn't meant to let a president unilaterally rewrite the nation's tariff schedule. The plaintiffs emphasized that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was designed for national emergencies, not for routine economic policy changes. The court agreed, ruling the tariffs unconstitutional. This decision was a significant victory for the coalition, as it underscored the limits of presidential power in economic matters. The ruling sent a clear message that the executive branch could not bypass legislative processes. The administration appealed, but the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit upheld the lower court's decision, calling the tariffs unbounded in scope, amount, and duration. The appellate court's decision reinforced the notion that the tariffs were excessively broad and lacked clear limitations. The court delayed its ruling to allow for a Supreme Court appeal. This delay was crucial, giving both sides time to prepare their arguments for the highest court in the land. After losing at every step, the administration asked the Supreme Court to intervene. The stakes were now higher than ever, as the final decision would have far-reaching implications for the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. Now, the justices will decide whether to affirm the president's power or restore Congress's traditional role in trade policy. This landmark case will set a precedent for how trade policy is managed in the future, potentially reshaping the landscape of American economic governance. President Trump's trade strategy relies on two main types of tariffs, both now under Supreme Court review. The first, trafficking tariffs, target imports from Canada, Mexico, and China, justified as responses to national security threats like fentanyl trafficking and illegal immigration. The second, worldwide tariffs, set a baseline 10% tax on nearly all imports, with some countries facing rates up to 50%. The goal, reduce the trade deficit and encourage domestic production. These tariffs reflect the administration's belief that trade policy should be a tool for achieving broad national objectives, not just economic ones. Instead of negotiating treaties, the White House used executive orders to impose sweeping taxes. Supporters praise the direct approach, but critics, including the states and businesses suing, argue it's created economic chaos and violated the Constitution. The Trump administration defends the tariffs by citing the president's emergency powers under IEPA. They argue the law gives the executive branch broad authority to act swiftly in response to threats like trade deficits and drug trafficking. The administration claims tariffs are a legitimate tool of national defense, and that Congress can end a declared emergency if it chooses. Since Congress hasn't acted, the White House says the courts should defer to the political branches. They also challenge the lower court's narrow reading of IEPA, insisting the law's broad language covers tariffs as a form of economic regulation. The states and businesses suing the government argue that only Congress has the constitutional power to impose taxes, including tariffs. They say IEPA was never meant to let a president overhaul trade policy or impose sweeping indefinite tariffs. The plaintiffs warn that the tariffs have created economic chaos, hurt local economies, and made it impossible for businesses to plan. They insist that major economic policy should be debated in Congress, not dictated by executive order. At its core, their case is about restoring limits on executive power and reaffirming Congress's role in shaping the nation's economy. As the Supreme Court reviews the IEPA tariffs, the Trump administration is turning to a backup plan. Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. This law lets the president impose tariffs if imports threaten national security, a justification courts rarely challenge. The administration has already used Section 232 to impose steep tariffs on steel, aluminum, and copper, and is now investigating a wider range of products from timber to pharmaceuticals. This strategy could allow the White House to target specific industries and countries under the broad banner of national security, creating new uncertainty for global trade and major exporters like India. The Supreme Court's decision will shape the future of American government and trade. If the court sides with the administration, it could give presidents sweeping power to impose tariffs by declaring emergencies, diminishing Congress's role in economic policy. A ruling against the administration would reaffirm that the power to tax and set trade policy belongs to Congress, restoring traditional checks and balances. The verdict will affect prices, business stability, and America's global relationships. Most importantly, it will answer a fundamental question: who holds the ultimate power to shape the nation's economic destiny?